Welcome to Capital Dateline Online. I'm with Jim Saunders, the executive editor of the News Service of Florida. Jim, there's a couple of weeks left, and I think what we should talk about now is the governor's wish list. How's the governor's wish list going?
Well, they kind of dropped a bomb on the governor's wish list at the end of last week. They moved into budget negotiations, and the House and Senate leadership basically said they were not going to set aside any money for his economic incentives package, and also less money than he wanted for tax cuts. This economic incentives package, I have to put a caveat on this. I mean, we're early in the week, and the budget process will be playing out over the next week, so things change. There are rabbits that get pulled out of hats all the time, but the governor spent months and months traveling the state, calling for putting $250 million into a fund that would be used to provide business incentives to businesses to bring them to Florida. And then in sort of the first go around, sort of the broad outline of the budget, the House and Senate leadership didn't include any money for it. So that has caused quite a stir in terms of what it means for the governor, whether this money will materialize later, or whether it's really off the table. And if so, there's all sorts of potential political ramifications from there.
And also the governor wanted $1 billion in tax cuts.
That's right, and this outline includes about $400 million. So again, that can change as well. So at this point, you got to kind of keep things in perspective. But he is not getting what he wants. There's been a lot of dynamics going on. The Senate last year was very much opposed to the economic incentives money. There was a big fight between the Senate and the governor's office about that. And I think the number they actually allocated last year was around $43 million. And then the governor's office, and Enterprise Florida had come up with this plan for a $250 million fund. And somewhat surprisingly, at least to me, was that the Senate actually endorsed that a little while ago. The House was never on board. And then they come out with this, again, they call them allocations, but it's sort of big picture budget numbers that they put out Friday night, and it had zero. There was sort of an interesting debate in the House, though, last week on a policy bill that dealt with economic incentives. Whether these incentive programs work, whether they're corporate welfare, so it was clear there was a lot of heartburn about this issue in the House, which generally is more conservative and more pro-business than the Senate is. So there's a lot of interesting dynamics. You got another dynamic on the Senate side is that the appropriations chairman over there is Tom Lee. And Tom Lee has historically, he's been in the Senate twice now, and for too long, very powerful positions. And one of the things that he has always talked about is long-range financial planning, and conservative in the sense of not necessarily conservative in cutting taxes, but making sure you got enough money in the bank down the road. He's been raising concerns, particularly about the tax cuts throughout this session, that the state just may not have enough money for these tax cuts that the governor wants. So I'm not sure that number that they've come in with on tax cuts is surprising as the incentives issue. And I think the incentives issue probably will be more of the battleground over here over the next week as the budget really plays out.
But it looks as though they do have some agreement on property taxes.
Yeah, the House and Senate have agreed to a proposal which would. Let me back up. One of the issues that the governor has pushed, as well as a lot of legislators, have been increasing public school funding to record levels, what they consider record levels. But the governor's budget, as budgets for years have done, relied on an incremental amount of property tax increases that are built into the school funding formula. This is so basically you're putting that burden on local property taxes as opposed to the state putting in a bunch of money to increase school funding. Well, the House and the Senate budget negotiators have agreed essentially to increase school funding this year, but to do it on the state's dime instead of relying on local property taxes. Now, I'm not sure you could call that a property tax cut,
Right.
but it is preventing an increase, at least an incremental increase in local property taxes. So that is one thing that has been agreed upon. The sort of offshoot of that, though, is when you put a bunch of state money in to do something like that, you have less state money for other things. Now that could be less state money for healthcare. It could be less state money for prisons, but it also could be less state money for what the governor wants to do.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Jim. For more news about Florida politics and government, visit the Advances section of our website and keep coming back to Capitol Dateline Online for daily postings.